Hi, thank you for joining us again for Sunday Bible Club online lesson. I'm Karen, which I'm sure some of you will remember and recognize me. I hope that you're all keeping well. I hope you've had a good half term for those of you who've had half term, and for those of you who may still be off school or doing different kinds of studies, I hope you're having a good time too. Well, today we're starting a whole new batch of stories about an extraordinary man called Daniel, which is from the Old Testament. And today's lesson, we'll be introduced to Daniel and his friends. But before that, I would like you to listen to this little story and see what you think. There were a group of children playing, and they're playing ball, throwing it to each other, kicking it to each other, and accidentally the ball smashed one of their neighbours' windows. Well, when that happened, all the children ran away. And one little girl ran into her house and went into her bedroom. And a little later, her mom came and said, "Darling, do you know anything about the neighbour's window being broken?" Well, the little girl went very shy and very quiet, and she just went, "No." And her mom again said, "Are you sure you don't know who broke the window of the neighbours?" And the little girl thought about it. You see, it was a hard thing for her to say, because in her head she was thinking, firstly, if I tell all my friends, maybe they'll not ever play with me again. Maybe they'll think I'm a snitch and they won't like me. Secondly, if I tell my mummy now that I've lied, and even if I tell the truth, she might be angry and upset with me. And thirdly, I don't want to have to be punished for this. It was an accident. And the little girl was thinking, and her mom said, "Well, I'm going to ask you once more. Do you know who broke the neighbor's window and how it happened?" And the little girl did the hard thing, and she did the right thing and the good thing, and she told the truth. Now, that was difficult for her because she couldn't know what her friends would think, what her mom would think. But she knew it was the right thing to do. And sometimes we have to stand up and stand out for what is right and true and good. But it doesn't mean it's always easy, does it? Well, after we have our song, we'll be talking about Daniel and his friends and a really difficult situation they had to face. But they knew they weren't on their own to make that decision and to see it through. Okay, well now let's get all geared up for our song, and I'll see you afterwards.
We're gonna see Jesus lifted high. Step by step, we're moving forward. lifted high. We're gonna see, we're gonna see, we're gonna see Jesus lifted high. Step by step, moving forward, little by little, taking root. Every breath, powerful weapon, strongholds come tumbling down, 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 down. We wanna see Jesus lifted high. Banner that flies across this land. Let all men might see the truth and know He is the way to heaven. We wanna see Jesus lifted high. Banner that flies across this land. Let all men might see the truth and know He is the way to heaven. We wanna see Jesus lifted high. Banner that flies across this land. Let all men might see the truth and know He's the way to heaven. We wanna see Jesus lifted high.
Hiya, welcome back. I hope you really enjoyed your songs. And I know I say this every time, but keep practicing them, because one of these days we'll all manage to get together and sing them together. And you know, mom and dad and grandma and granddad, or whoever your carer is, you can take part in as well, and all learn the words over and over so that they stay in your heart. Well, like I said, today's story is about a man called Daniel. And I told you about the little girl who had to speak the truth because she knew it was the right thing to do, even though it meant that her friends might not like her anymore because of that and might think she's a snitch. Well, Daniel and his friends had a similar situation where they were going to have to make some hard decisions about doing what is right rather than doing what is wrong. So, our story starts in the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Can you say that? Nebuchadnezzar. He was a king from a nation that didn't love God, that did not worship God, that was horrible, horrible towards God's people. And God's people, sadly, at that time, hadn't been behaving the way they should. They hadn't been loving each other or loving God as they should, which, as you know, is what they were called to do. That's what God wanted his people to do, so that they could have a good and happy life with him. Well, sadly, they didn't. And so to teach them a lesson, God allowed Nebuchadnezzar and his troops, his army, to go and take and invade Israel. Yeah, I know. Well, what do you think happened? Well, in those days, when there were wars, very often the king's soldiers and troops would take captives. So they'd be like prisoners, but they would be taken so that they could work like as slaves or do whatever the king really wanted them to do. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was clever because he thought, if we take them all and bring them to my city, they might be strong enough to try and fight their way out. So instead, he said to his officials, I want you to bring some of them from the royal family and those who are from the nobility, you know, like dukes and what have you. And I want you to choose some of the young men to come and work for me. But the young men must be, you know, the most handsome, the cleverest, because I want them for myself, to work for me. So that's what the officials did. And in the group of young men that were brought to the palace were 4 young lads. And their names were Daniel, and I'm going to read this so I get the pronunciation right and you can practice. Daniel, that's easy. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, these 4 friends, they not only were taken captive, that means taken prisoner and sent to the palace because they were handsome and very intelligent and would be good to work for the king, they also had to be made into what the king wanted them to be. And one of the ways they did that was to change all their names. So Daniel didn't have his name that his mommy and daddy gave him at his birth. He had to be known as Belteshazzar. And Hananiah wasn't allowed to keep his name that his mommy and daddy gave him. He was called Shadrach. As for Mishael, he was called Meshach. And to Azariah, he was called Abednego. And the reason the king did that was so that they would hopefully, in time, forget all about their Israel. They'll forget all about their names, and they'll forget about their family. They'll forget even about their God, the one true God. So he changed their names, but he did not change their heart. And that's what's we're going to learn about in this story. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Belteshazzar were part of the special people in the king's palace, the king's young men that he wanted to basically make healthy and even more intelligent. So they had lessons like art lessons and history lessons and all sorts of things, so that they could learn all about the new place they lived in. And hopefully, the king thought, forget about where they came from. Well, they learned it, and they didn't forget where they came from, but they learned it. And that was okay. Their names had been changed, but they knew who they were, so that was kind of okay. The next thing was that the king told his officials, you need to make sure they eat the best food in the palace and have plenty of wine to drink. He wanted them to be nice and strong and feel special. Well, Daniel and his friends said, no, we can't do that. And I'll explain to you why. The king used to eat the food that was sacrificed to idols. He also ate food that Daniel and his friends were not allowed to eat when they were in Israel, because God had given laws about how food should be prepared, especially meat. So Daniel and his friends said, no, we can't do that. Well, the court official was really worried. He said, hang on a minute. If you don't eat what the king says you've got to eat, and you look pale and skinny and scrawny, I'm going to get into trouble and I might get my head chopped off. And he wasn't happy. And on top of that, Daniel and his friends said, we don't want to drink the wine because we don't need wine. We would rather have water because that would be the right thing to do. Well, the court official was like, what are you doing to me? But Daniel then said to him, okay, why don't you let us have vegetables and water to eat so that we can have that for a week? And then if we look sickly, like you think we will, we'll do what the king asks. So the court official said, oh, okay, but only 1 week. Well, guess what? The Bible tells us that Daniel and his 3 friends, not only did they eat vegetables and drank water, but they looked well. They looked even better than the others. And when it came time, Daniel and his friends were presented to the king as some of the wisest, most clever people among all the young men that worked in the palace. And not only were they really, really clever, but I'll read to you what it says. It says that at the end of the time set by the king, so then when he wanted to see all these young men and make sure that they were the best ones in the world, Nebuchadnezzar, that's the king, remember, talked with them. And he found no one like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In everything, whether it was wisdom, which means making decisions wisely, whether it was in understanding, that's being able to understand everything that comes and goes and being able to make sense of it. When the king questioned them, so mini exam, they were 10 times better than all the magicians and the enchanters in the whole kingdom. Do you imagine that? And they were only young men. But they didn't do magic. They didn't do anything like that. What they did is they put their trust in God and did good. And because of that, the king, well, he had to accept that they did what was right and good by remembering their God and putting their trust in him, even when their names were changed. They were good and trusted their God when they had to learn all these things about different wisdom and maybe even things that they didn't agree with. But they remembered their God and they remembered to put their trust in him. And when the food came around and when the wine came around, they didn't have it because they knew to trust in their God and do the right thing. And so Nebuchadnezzar goes and takes them into his service because he finds them. Can you remember how many times? Better than everybody else already in his service. That means working for him. How many times? Twice? No. 3 times? No. 5 times? No. 6 times? No. 9 times? No. 10 times wiser. So you see, Daniel and his friends, they put their trust in God and they did good. So they could have got into trouble. And maybe the officials could have got into trouble too. But they didn't. And it's because they did trust God and they did good. And so our Bible verse, which is from Psalm 37 verse 3, which is also in the Old Testament, so you can look it up. It says this: trust in the Lord and do good. Can you repeat that with me? Trust in the Lord and do good.